Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about 5Gbe NAS. More precisely, I want to talk about this. This is the QNAP TVS 672N. It's one of the latest of their 5Gbe Ethernet NASes, and we're seeing more and more 5Gbe solutions from them. On top of that, we're seeing this adapter that was released a few months ago. That is their USB 3 to 5Gbe Ethernet adapter, allowing Windows and Mac users to get up to 5Gbe Ethernet connectivity with NAS devices, both ways. It can be utilized in a number of ways. It can be connected from your client to your NAS. It can be connected to your NAS to give some NASes that are Intel powered and above a 5Gbe Ethernet port. It can even be used to connect PCs and Mac devices literally together with that cable, so they can communicate files at 5Gbe Ethernet. But in this three-part series of videos, I want to do a few very different kinds of tests using this adapter. I'm going to be using a single 7200 RPM enterprise level drive, and that is going to be a Seagate Iron Wolf drive, and on top of the Pro Series drive. On top of that, I've also got some Seagate Iron Wolf drives in a RAID 5 environment. That's 3 4TB drives. And finally, I've got 2 Seagate Iron Wolf SSDs in a RAID 1 environment. So what we've got is one drive on its own, 3 drives in a RAID 5, and 2 SSDs in a mirrored RAID. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 1GBE speed tests and 5GBE speed tests utilizing this device. What we want to see in this series of videos are the following. One, what are the real world speeds of this adapter? Because although the official pages do mention something along the lines of 4 to 420 megabits per second, that is in an optimal environment, and a lot of you guys aren't going to be running that setup. So what we want to look at today is what are the speeds that you, the average person, are going to get with regards to either one drive, a RAID 5 of hard drives, or SSD. The second thing we want to find out about this device is how will it behave in things like video editing, in Steam gaming, and other real-world scenarios where this device will be used, and not just simple speed tests with AJA and Blackmagic, which of course we're going to do anyway. But in order to get this test done correctly, it's worth highlighting two things straight off the bat. Number one, the majority of the content in this and the other two videos afterwards are going to be directly off-screen. I'm going to be using some capture recording software, namely OBS, and that software is going to be recording straight from the screen. The second thing, of course, is OBS is quite a hungry little app, and it does make its mark on the speed test that I do. You may have noticed me doing a bunch of preliminary disclaimers at the beginning of a number of my videos that when I do directly record on using capture software, sometimes speeds will dip even as much as 10%, so you have to factor that in. I will try to mention it as much as possible throughout the course of the videos, but do remember that straight off the bat, that it will play its part. The second thing is, of course, that when this is set up, I will be testing 1GBE to give you a comparison against the 5GBE connection. But it's worth mentioning that regardless of the media that you use, 1Gbe Ethernet will max out at around 100 to 109 megabits per second, and I fully expect all 3 RAID setups to cap at 109 at both read and write, but we shall see. Now, I've set jumbo packets and jumbo frame to 9000 on both of these devices on both sets of connections, so that has removed that as any kind of bottleneck. I'm not utilizing caching because, as impressive as caching is in 2019, I don't think a lot of you will be using caching in this way. Maybe you will, and then I'll use all of this media in some sort of fantastic caching setup in the near future. But I'm going to move over to this screen now and start making my way through the initial speed tests of this 5GBE adapter, this 5GBE NAS, and that big old pile of Seagate hard drives and SSDs. Let's get in there. Right, so here we are on the desktop of my PC. We are using the OBS software, just as we talked about earlier on, and I'd like to apologise in advance for the humming you may hear in the background from the NAS that's relatively close to the mic. It does make things a little bit tough to do a video like this and get the optimal kind of performance levels, and with 5GBE you are going to be utilising it, by most people's standards anyway, in a direct access capacity. That is, connecting the NAS directly into the NAS without the PC directly into the NAS without a switch. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm also using 1GBE LAN connectivity directly into the NAS too, and the result is when I've searched the local area network, I've found the NAS in 2 different locations. The IP ending 142 is the 5Gbe Ethernet connection, and the one ending 147 is the standard 1Gbe Ethernet connection. Now, as mentioned earlier on, QNAP do go at lengths to mention that their device can go up to 420 megabits per second, but do remember that this was recorded in a Windows transfer environment, so that does not factor in the kind of test that we're doing today. So don't think of anything negative or positive by these results, just take them for what they are and what they mean to your storage setup. Now, straight off the bat, I've opened up QTS on both desktop devices here so we can look at them, with 147 once again being our 1 gigabit Ethernet connection and 142 being our 5 gigabit Ethernet connection. Don't worry, I'll tell you as we go, but just in case you want to see these connections as they are, then you'll get to see them. Now, I've already set up a big old pile of network drives here. Now, these network drives comprise all these different kinds of media. If we go to the storage manager here and we go to the disks, we can see that this NAS I've populated with 6 disks. The first disk is that 14 TB drive. Now, I've not created a shared folder of this entire storage space because I want to leave some room for snapshots later on. So when going through this, do remember that sometimes the amount of capacity showing will be less than the overall disk, and that's because I've got a follow-up video coming soon featuring virtual JBOD and snapshots. So the RAID group of 1 is that single drive there, that one drive. The next RAID group is the RAID 5 involving those 4 TB disks, or inhabiting that space there. And finally, sorry, I should really go to the disks and show you exactly what those disks are. Those disks there, as you can see, are 4 TB Seagate Iron Wolf disks. And once again, these all arrived with that Iron Wolf health management and all of that lovely testing if we want to do that for a future video. Next, we've got those 2 SSDs, and they are in a RAID 1 environment. Don't worry, in parts 2 and 3, I'll skim over this nice and quick, but this first part has to be a bit more detailed. This is utilising Seagate Iron Wolf 110 SSDs, and they are in a RAID 1 environment, so a mirror. So there's our storage, and on top of that, I've created some shared folders. Now, these shared folders give us information about the drives we're going to be testing. We have got the RAID 5 storage there, we have got the RAID 1 SSD storage there, and we've got our 14 TB storage there. These are 3 shared folders that we're going to be utilising for the test today. And just in case there's any erring doubt required, the system of the device we're using today, let's go into there, let's get our hardware up. It would be a lot easier if I'd just gone into my computer. But there is our system we're utilising today. It's an i7 with 16 gig of memory. But it is a laptop and it doesn't have any GPU apart from embedded graphics. So I think that's enough that we've done so far with regards to the setup of our test today. And it's worth mentioning finally about our shared folders. Now, these are what we're going to be utilising for our AJA, Blackmagic and Windows file transfer tests. Folders X, Y and Z are our 1 GBE connections, as you can see from the IP ending 147, 147, 147. We have got the 14 TB drive, the RAID 5 and the RAID 1 SSD. Down here, we've then got the 5 GBE versions of those exact same folders. And these are what we're going to use for testing. So just remember, XYZ is 1 GBE and RST is our 5 gigabit Ethernet tests. So first and foremost, let's do our Blackmagic test. Now, once again, I do apologise for performance dips using screen recording software, and I hope you heard my disclaimer at the top of the video. Now, I've not run a test on this series of drives yet. I've only done a test on the 5 GBEs, making sure everything was working. But let's do our 1 GBE test, and we fully expect these drives to cap out at about 100 to 109 megs, bearing in mind that the screen recording software OBS may take its toll on the system. So if we click start, we can get this first test up and running. And as we predicted, we're getting a write speed there of around 100 megs. And because this is one hard drive on its own, that is to be expected. Although it's also, of course, worth mentioning that if in a RAID environment, or if we were using a bigger connection, enterprise level drives give you significantly more speed. There's lots of reasons for this, from caching to the build of the platters, but predominantly, I know there's a lot of argument over this, one of the best ways to get speed in those environments is thanks to the drive being 7200 RPM. Obviously that's part of a big pie of things, but that's one of the main factors. So if we come out of that, we can then test one of the other drives, because I think we should give each of the 1GBE tests a go. That's a single hard drive. So then we look at the RAID 5 environment and we see what speeds we get from that. And again, we're getting that 100 to 109 rate all the way through there. And you can probably hear the clicks and whirs of those hard drives in the background of this recording. Little bit of grumbling there between the drives, because obviously these are mechanical drives working a RAID environment at once. So finally, let's have a look at those two SSDs. And again, despite the fact they're SSDs, remember that we should just see the same speeds again. They'll be quicker and they'll be more consistent because they're SSDs with no mechanical parts, but the read and write clicks and whirs are still there, but that's because the hard drives are still being used generally by the NAS. So this should hopefully, if nothing else you take from this test, and I hope you take more than it, just remember that 1 gigabit Ethernet connectivity to a NAS, it doesn't matter what media you use, you are always going to hit this bottleneck. So let's make our way now to the 5 gigabit Ethernet testing using drives R, S and T. So first and foremost, let's use our 14 TB Seagate Iron Wolf drive. This is one drive on its own. This is via 5GBE, and straight away that one drive is maxing out. So as mentioned earlier on, enterprise level drive should give you around 200 to 240 megabytes per second read, and close to that in write. What we're seeing here over 5 gigabit Ethernet using Blackmagic is a variety of different performance levels here, all of which immediately, even with a single drive on its own, is showing that the 5GBE adapter from QNAP is doing its job. Let's move over to the next drive. This next drive we move into the RAID area. So RAID 5 utilizing that same 5GBE connection. Now the hope is we're going to get similar or better than the one enterprise level drive, because the RAID 5 is comprised of 4 TB standard non-pro drives at 5400 RPM and a smaller cache factor. So let's see what read and write we're going to get. Now, we're already seeing an improved performance at 280 because those drives are in a RAID environment. And with RAID, even though the individual drives are less than that of the enterprise level 14 TB drive, because you're using a RAID 5 environment, you have multiple drives being read and written to synchronously. But RAID 5 is still one of the lowest read and writes over all the RAID levels, with RAID 6 obviously being the most resource intensive and therefore giving you the slowest results. So if we were using these normal drives perhaps in a RAID 0 together, we would see great speeds, but then you would lose that redundancy. So finally, let's make our way over to the SSD. Now the two SSDs in a RAID 1 should give us the highest speed so far. Now if we take the drag factor of the screen recording software that I've talked about before, I'm predicting somewhere in the region of 350 to 400 megs minimum, because although it is two drives in a RAID 1 environment, we have got the screen recording software happening in real time, and of course we have got the drives themselves running through this adapter, and there's always a bit of drag. So straight away off there, okay, so we hit 300 on the first layer, and we're going to keep moving forward with read at a tremendously higher number there. Now, I am a little disappointed by those numbers, because as I have mentioned, I have run the tests prior to this video without the screen recording in place, and I can tell you right now that I was getting write speeds of around 385, with the read speed capping at just over 400. But once again, because of the screen recording software, we are already utilizing a lot of GPU power that is otherwise and CPU power that's otherwise utilized by the test software. So I think that immediately we can take from this that you will get greater speeds from this adapter, and the better media you use and the better RAID environment, you will get better than that. But let's move away from Blackmagic and run some other tests, and these tests we're going to run a little quicker. We're going to look at AJA first. We're going to use a 4K file, big old file there, and the test file size of 1 gigabyte. So this is a big old file. Once again, just for a performance benchmark, we're just going to run the SSDs in 1 GBE, just to make sure you guys can still see it there, and immediately, boom, we're capping out at 108 straight away. So again, we are testing 1 gigabit Ethernet on those SSDs. We're just going to do one barrage of tests there and just do one layer using that big old 4K file, test file from AJA's software. So again, remember, again, the recording software will make its impact. So a lot of that read should be over 100, but I would blame the recording software. So let's make our way to the 5GBE tests. This is going to be the Seagate single drive over 5GBE. Let's go. So immediately, boom, we're hitting an early 270, 260. But what you will find with testing drives, particularly in AJA, is the spin up of mechanical hard drives does make a big difference. And of course, whereas Blackmagic gives you the idea of randomly testing a whole myriad of different test files, with AJA we can select one particular test file over and over again, with this file being generated on that NAS drive. And you will always see the speed peak and then dip down over time. So this has been the single enterprise hard drive and the speeds we're looking at here. I did expect AJA to be less than Blackmagic because we went for one of the hardest tests straight off the bat, but let's move a little further down the chain, shall we, and make our way onto that RAID 5 group of standard Seagate IronWolf hard drives. Now with this one, again, I do think we will get lesser speeds than that of Blackmagic, but let's see. Because again, we never got the chance to test this big old 4K file in Blackmagic. Let's go. So immediately we are getting greater speeds on that RAID 5 environment than we were on the the single drive that was an enterprise level hard drive. We are going to have to sort of ignore the read a tiny bit because of the capture software and its interaction with the SSD on this PC. So what we're concentrating on really is the write speed more than anything today. But immediately we are seeing greater consistent speeds on the RAID compared with that single hard drive, which is what we expected, but moreover, that we are getting those speeds via the RAID 5 of just 3 disks in a RAID 5 over the 5GBE adapter. Maybe if I'd populated this whole device with normal hard drives, this speed would have capped at that 400 to 420 megs. I haven't got that set up here, so that's one for potentially another video, or one for you guys to test at home. So let's make our way over now to the SSD, and this is going to be our SSD IronWolves, and this is the RAID 1 environment with SSDs. We'll go into that there and run those tests, and immediately those read and write speeds are consistently high. We're not surprised, Seagate IronWolf SSDs being by far the better performance than all of the other drives that we talked about today. Now, we're not getting 500 megs, which is a little disappointing, but at no point have QNAP ever said that this adapter will give you flat out 500 megs without an ideal scenario, which I imagine is one of the purest auto-tiered setups ever. But with 2 SSDs in a RAID 1 environment, we're getting write speeds not dissimilar to that of the RAID 5. And there's a few things to take from that. First and foremost, it means that if you are going to use a NAS with the 5GBE adapter, you don't need to have to worry so much about only using SSDs, and you can get away with a standard hard drive environment and take advantage of RAID performance benchmarks via 5GBE. Or you can go for an SSD caching environment if that suits your needs better. Now, once again, I will mention it for the billionth time, the screen recording software plays its part on performance. And that's why we're seeing slightly irregular performance speeds here. If we open up the task manager in the background, we will see that the utilization is already quite high up. We're seeing AJA's test system utilizing obviously a lot of network connectivity and bandwidth because of using those adapters, but we're seeing a good chunk of our resources being utilized by these programs. Now, I'm going to wrap things up now, but just to make it nice and simple, all I'm going to do is open up our 5GBE drives, and we're going to open them up all in their own respective individual environments. So let's open up a window each, and we're going to dump a bunch of drives in. Now we're going to do this in 2 ways. First and foremost, I'm going to dump media onto the 14 TB drive. But on top of that, I'm then going to wait a little bit and send data to all 3 at the same time, just to see how the network bandwidth deals with that. Because remember, our maximum throughput cannot exceed around 500 megs because of the 5Gbe adapter. So let's go into my footage folder here, and we're just going to grab a big old pile of data. What's the threshold we have here? This is 48 gig. That's a huge amount of data to play with. We're going to click copy, and we're going to copy it first onto the 14 TB drive. Now remember, we aren't looking to compare overall copy speeds, because the overall copy speeds aren't going to matter, because we've already worked out that enterprise hard drive versus RAID 5 standard hard drive versus SSD has its own performance benefits. But as we can see here, a direct Windows transfer, obviously the type of file, you can see that video files that have their own compression already in place are the ones that are slowing things down. The minute we start going into the smaller files, like docs, images, PNGs, JPEG and more, we see this speed go up because they're a great deal easier to contend with. Now, while it's doing all of this on our hard drive, I'm now going to, and simultaneously, start writing data into these other folders. So I'm going to create a folder here and just call it test for now. And in this folder, I'm then going to dump that same pile of data. And then finally, the RAID 5, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Create a folder called test. And then dump that same data. And then we're going to see what exactly that's doing to our network traffic. So we've got the 3 actions running in the task manager here. Let's try and open that up nice and big so we can see all of that happening at once. We're also going to open up the task manager and see what our network activity looks like. And as you can see, our network activity is happening there in real time. And we can see now that the speed is being leveraged between the 3 of them. We're not seeing one connection get the full network bandwidth control. We're seeing it shared between all 3, with all 3 different kinds of volume getting data simultaneously. Now, this is more to do with Windows' own network drive and file transfer utilization, but we can still see a lot of data being transmitted. But with the fluctuation between them, it's interesting to see that the priority doesn't seem to be very clear, because the same files are happening at the same time without them being queued. But I'm going to leave this running here in the background. This has been a speed test over 5Gbe using AJA and Blackmagic, and of course those Seagate drives, in a test environment here with my Windows PC connected via the QNAP adapter. And again, if you do want to get hold of one of these bad boys, I of course recommend the guys at span.com, or if you want to learn more, go to the NAS Compare article in the description. This is part 1 of 3, with the next series of tests focusing a great deal more on some applications that you yourself may use 5Gbe connectivity for. But otherwise, click like if you enjoyed this, click subscribe to learn more, and I'll see you guys next time.